Hello! So, today we are continuing our browser project where we are going to build an Android browser from Android components written by Mozilla, and a bunch of Mozilla browsers are built with those components, and we are going to use them, stack them together, build an Android browser, and then maybe do some interesting things with it. So, this is the repo. I will also post this into the chat. And I'll show you the state we ended with last time. It's nothing special. We integrated the engine component, which can render the web, and you can already use this and browse. But of course, it only loads the website that we pointed it to here in code. It doesn't do any more than that. And I think one of the first things we are going to need is the toolbar. And we don't want to write this ourselves, at least not today. So we are going to use one of the components for that. And last time I already explained that there is a way how components are abstracted. So there are those concept components, and those concept components only contain interfaces that describe how the component can be used. So there's a concept toolbar component which describes how a toolbar can be used. There's a toolbar interface, for example. And other components or even app code only depends on or uses the interfaces in this component. And then you can pick one implementation or make your own implementation, and as long as you use those interfaces, everything will just work with all the other code. So there's an implementation of this, of course, that is called the browser toolbar component. And if you use Firefox beta or nightly currently, let me look those up on Google Play. Firefox nightly. And let's see. This is maybe a good screenshot. You can see a toolbar here at the top. Unfortunately, this is not showing a website right now. This is overlaying the toolbar. Anyhow, Firefox Nightly and Beta are also using this component. So it's already proven, it's shipping. And we are going to use this too in this browser now. So let's just do this. And ideally this is fast. And we can get this done quite quickly. So here are our components. We add the browser toolbar component as well. In this case, I'm not adding the concept component like I did with the engine, because I want to use this very specific toolbar implementation. I don't need to change the toolbar at runtime or in different build variants. With the engine, maybe I want to do this. We are using the nightly version of the engine, which is like the most bleeding edge version of the engine. And then we could have other build variants that use the beta version or release version of the engine. But for the toolbar, we will probably always have the same toolbar. So we do not need to deal with using the concept everywhere. We can just slam in the component implementation as is. So currently this is a frame layout. I think we could just start with the linear layout. No need to make it more complicated right now. Because for now we just throw in the toolbar here. Match parent wrap content. Thank you for following. Hugo, I guess. Aren't you streaming right now as well? I think I saw you post something. Yeah, so let's see, how does this look like in a preview? There's a toolbar. It's interestingly very small in the preview, but it should be better on a device. So I'm going to deploy this. So in the repo, I opened two issues last time. One is about the name. I picked Ice Ant. It was a random pick based on Firefox, Ice Ant because it's a small mobile browser. But maybe we can pick something more interesting if anyone has an idea. And the second issue is about managing singletons. We will have a bunch of components like the engine that exist in the app at all times. It's always running, it's always there. And we need to somehow get references to those singletons at times. And yeah, there are multiple options. It's like a dependency injection problem, I guess. In one of our reference browsers, which is also an example browser, we use this components object that is attached to the application object, and then from any context you can get to the application object, and then to the components object, and then to the other components that are lazily created here. It works. It's a bit more evolved because you need to find the things yourself and follow the path. But it works reasonably well because we have some extension methods that make it easier if you are in a fragment or wherever. Of course, we could also use Dagger or Hilt or Coin or whatever. I'm open to trying something else here. So if anyone has an opinion, please go to issue number 2. All right, did we deploy? Okay, it looks like there's a pretty wide toolbar. It's interesting that it's that wide. I think there is something not right with maybe the theme, but I'm surprised that the default theme, the component picks is that bad. That's something we should probably fix in the component at some time. But I almost guess if we pick like a black background, that we will see the toolbar. I almost guess it's just white with white text right now, or transparent with white text. Yeah, that looks better. Oops, did I click? Yeah. So, you are probably noticing something here. We don't see a URL, and if I click into the toolbar and type something, it doesn't load. The reason for that is, by default, it's just a simple toolbar, or simple, let's say a toolbar that can do a bunch of things that a browser needs to do, and the engine can render things, but they need to talk to each other. Whenever the engine loads or displays something here, you want to show the URL here, and whenever we type something here, we want to load this. So we need some glue so that those two things can talk to each other. Last time we created this engine session here, which is kind of like a tab in a browser. We tell it to load this URL and then tell the view to render this session. So what we in theory would need to do here is on the engine session, we register an observer, and then we look at events like, okay, the URL changed, and if this happens, we update the toolbar, and when the toolbar changes, we call maybe load URL, and it's a bunch of glue code. And since that is almost always the same, because we have engine interfaces with implementations and toolbar interfaces with implementations, the glue between those is almost always the same. That means that we can actually build a component for that too, and that's what we did. I go back to the components repository. That's part of those feature components, and there is one called, or there are actually two that we want now. Feature toolbar. This knows how it, if things happen, state changes, we will get to this later, how to update the toolbar, what things to call on the toolbar, and so on. And feature session, that's something we will get to in a second, I guess, which knows if there are multiple tabs, which one should I render, and if this changes, I need to update some state, and that's the state that the toolbar is listening to. So that's what we are going to do. But first of all, we need state somewhere. We only have an engine that can emit events, and no one is listening to those events right now. So there's no state that we can access to actually update the toolbar. And there is a component for that, surprise. There is browser session. That's the old component. It's a little bit clunky. It has this session manager object that has a list of sessions, which are tabs. You can call add on a manager, remove on a manager. It's like create, read, update, delete operations, basically. This turned out to work, but we ran into a bunch of problems. So we wrote a new version that is actually completely different. So new version is not the right term, I guess. It's a completely different way of dealing with state. And I'm surprised the new one doesn't seem to be listed on the start page. That's something we should change. It's called BrowserState. BrowserState is working differently. You do not have this manager object anymore. Instead, you have a store. The store has a state. It's immutable this time. You can dispatch actions on the store that will change the state, and then it will notify all things that are listening about this new state. And we want to use this new thing, of course. The problem with that is that we are in between a migration from the old session manager to this new browser store. So currently, some things still need the old session manager. So this means in the app, we currently need to have both. And you can already see that, oh, that is maybe problematic, because if state is in two places, how do we keep them in sync? The good thing is we wrote this code because we need to migrate from one component to the other as well. So usually you just do not need to care, and you can read state from either. So ideally from the new thing only. So let's just start integrating those state components, and then the component that glues the toolbar to the engine. Okay, let's go. The first one is browser session. That is the legacy session manager, and then BrowserState, the new thing. And those again will introduce two singletons, basically. The session manager is a singleton. Everyone wants to talk to the same one. The browser store is a singleton. And again, the components project itself does not force you to use a specific dependency injection framework to handle your singleton. It's up to you. And the last time we just, for the engine, created it in the activity, which is obviously totally wrong because this is not a singleton if it's in the activity. The app process lives longer than the activity, so this needs to move somewhere else. That is, again, hint, issue 2 in this repository. If you want to see something specifically used for that, like dagger, hilt, coin, whatever, please leave a comment here. And I think we need to decide to pick something soon. Today I will just add this here as well. We only want to get this toolbar working. So we need this session manager. Again, this is the same thing. A session is a tab in a browser. Whenever we need a new one, we will tell the session manager if we remove a tab and so on. And the session manager will also keep track of which one is the selected tab. Like in a browser, here I'm looking at this GitHub page and this tab is selected, and I can select other tabs and then this one is selected. So if this desktop browser would use our session manager, then we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sessions in it, and it knows, okay, the second one is selected. So that's what this session manager will do for you. And it needs an engine. And I mentioned there's a new thing. I will just call the property store here. It's a browser store class. Browser store. This is the new thing. That's the thing we actually want to use. And to keep both in sync, we can just pass the store to the session manager. And now they will be synchronized. So we use the new store everywhere, and the session manager we will only pass to components that so far still depend on the session manager. So we created all those custom things here to create the engine session here and the loader URL. We will remove this part now. In this new code, we will only create the view here. Just to recap, we create the view manually here because we dropped an interface into the layout and we need to help Android figure out which class to actually create. So we did this here. And for now, let's also keep a reference to the engine view. Because we are... No, I changed my mind. Let's not do it. Let's set this up. We have now a session manager. It's empty. And we want to always render the currently selected tab here in our browser. How can we do this? We need again some glue code, right? The session manager, you could actually take this now and register an observer again. Listen to, okay, a new session got added, this one got selected, now we render it, and it's again always the same glue code. So if you don't need anything fancy, you can just use this functionality wrapped as a component. Yay! Here's the feature session component. This one will glue sessions and views and engines together for us. Awesome. Let's drop this in here too. And soon we should set up something that is nicer for dealing with all those dependencies here, I guess. feature session. It's included. Let's load it. Okay. Okay. Now, those feature components usually have classes that are also called something feature. So we have a session feature here. The session feature, we pass things to it that it needs, and then we need to pass some lifecycle methods to it, or use the lifecycle features of Android X, and then it will do it itself. But for now, we will use the raw API, I guess. We create a session feature here. This one already uses the store, so we pass in the store. What else does this need? A go back use case. That's a good time to talk about use cases, I guess. We have this glue code that needs, or that knows how to glue components together. You have a similar problem if you want to perform an action, like I want to create a new tab and load this URL. Then there are multiple things you need to do. You need to create a session object with the URL. You need to pass it to the session manager. You need to get a matching engine session and tell it to now load this page. And that's a bunch of boilerplate. If you need to do this in multiple places, that gets annoying. So we created those use case classes. They basically wrap those this functionality together and provide you a nice thing you can call. What's nice about this is that you can also pass this to other components like we do here. The session feature needs to navigate back in a session, and we will later see why. And we pass in this use case so that this feature can just call it to navigate back, and that way the feature does not need to know about all the implementation details of how to actually navigate back. This also means the feature does not need to have hard references on all the things that are needed to navigate back. That's nice because we have all those separate components, and we don't want to have the components depend on everything. So this feature will only call this use case, and this use case will get all the things that it needs to perform whatever action. So we need a go back use case here. And the session use cases is a group that provides multiple use cases, and we can create an instance of that and then pass in only the go back use case. And engine session use cases. Since we glue the session manager and the engine together, or the engine view in this case, this feature also needs to know how to actually create a session inside the engine to later load something in it. And for that, it will get this use case. And finally, it will also need the view. And I will just did I assign an ID to it? Yeah, engine view. Okay. Now I mentioned that there are some lifecycle methods. The session feature takes care of we always render the selected session here. of course, it only needs to do that while the app is in the foreground. If I'm in the background, it doesn't need to do anything at all. So we need to pass this in. We can also use the lifecycle observer mechanisms, or not all, but a bunch of features that have those requirements implement lifecycle aware feature, and that means they are lifecycle observers, so we can also just register them here. Maybe do that. I think we are live. Are we? Oh, we are playing activity right now. Okay, then let's do it manually. Let's switch to the Android X activity pretty soon. On stop. Those two are important for the feature. By the way, whoever is watching, you can always ask questions, and I'm happy to stop and answer your question before moving on. So, we've set up the session feature, and we start and stop it. That should be all to glue the engine to the session manager. If we now run this, it should look less interesting because first we need to get rid of this error. Let's see. Oh yeah, of course. Same problem that we have with inflating the thing. Find view by ID returns a view, and the thing needs an engine view. Engine view is an interface, and it is not a view, the interface, because Android unfortunately does not have a view interface, so we can't make engine view the interface extend the class view. So we need to help Kotlin or the JVM to understand that this view is in fact an engine view instance. What we are going to see now is probably a lot of white and a black toolbar, I hope. Yeah. The feature is working now, but there's actually no session in a session manager. It's like empty, so there's nothing to show. It's basically a browser without any tabs. So to reproduce what we did previously, we could now just add the session to the session manager. Notice that I use the session manager, but we pass in the store. The session manager will take care, sync its state to the store we passed in. So the session feature will see it in the store, even though we added it to the session manager. That is unfortunately a bit confusing, and yeah, due to the fact that we are currently migrating from session manager away, soon you won't need this anymore. And we are back at the previous state, but now it is rendering sessions from the session manager. Now, the session manager has all the state now. It takes care of listening to the engine, and if, for example, I click on this button here, the URL changes to some other page, and it will notice this and update the session object. So I can, just as an example, get the selected session from the session manager and then .url. Because it's nullable, as we saw earlier, there might not be a selected session. And now what I could now do is I register to the session manager I want to observe the selected session and then get the URL, for example, and update the toolbar. And that's the glue code that we wanted to get for free from the feature toolbar component. So let's add this here, sync, and let's organize this a little bit nicer here. Okay, concepts, browser components, feature components. Sorry to interrupt, to ask, does it use the same rendering engine as native WebView? No, this is using GeckoView. GeckoView is the Gecko engine that is powering Firefox wrapped as an Android library. And the reason for that, I mentioned this in the first episode very quickly, is WebView is not good enough if you want to build a browser. At least a full-featured browser for the web. GeckoView has some unique features that are awesome if you want to build a browser. For example, you can use web extensions with GeckoView. You can have multiple sessions or tabs, and they don't need to be rendered on the screen right now. So with WebView, you always need to have WebView instances around. You can, in theory, use the application context and not attach them to an activity, but it will break some things and it is very hacky. So GeckoView does not have those requirements. You can use it, you can use the runtime independently from any views or activities or fragments being on the screen right now. And then this Android Components project from Mozilla has a wrapper around this, and those are those engine components. Like they wrap it behind a unified API that all the components can use and shield it from changes. So if the GeckoView API changes, it doesn't matter, we only need to do this change in this component. And we can use different versions of GeckoView, like we have the release version, beta version, nightly versions, and we can switch between them because they all use the same API that our interfaces force it to use. And there's also an engine system component that actually uses WebView. So you can build an app that uses either GeckoView or WebView or switches at runtime. That's all possible in theory. Of course, as I mentioned before, the WebView does not support all the fancy features. So if you use the engine system component, it is not as powerful. There are some things you just can't do with it, like loading web extensions. And this is now using GeckoView nightly, the most bleeding edge version that is built every night. And the same one that powers Firefox nightly and Firefox beta. And yeah, we are going to use it too, because we want to build all the fancy features. We want to maybe load web extensions into this browser and do ad blocking. And I'm open to ideas what to actually do. This is the repo. I will just drop it into the chat once more. And just file issues if you want to see specific things. For now, we just want to get a very simple browser going, drop in some more components to get more features. And once it's good enough, then we will maybe replace some components with some other features or try something new. And I need your help to come up with ideas what to actually do. So back to this, we now need to glue the engine and the toolbar together. So we need the toolbar feature. And you already see there is an opportunity to reduce boilerplate even more. Because if you end up using a ton of components, you will also end up having a lot of code that creates and configures those components. So the toolbar, did I give this an ID? No. Let's give it an ID so that we can find it. Toolbar. And yeah, maybe next time we start to clean this up. Maybe we want to use fragments, or I'm not sure, something else. I don't think it makes sense to throw everything into the activity here. So we need to find a toolbar, and it's not a view. We can cast it to browser toolbar. What else does it need? The store, yeah, it needs the state to display things. A load URL use case. As I mentioned before, those use cases are used to invoke things that need to talk to multiple things. So it wraps this in a nice class that you can invoke. The toolbar, obviously, if you type into it, needs to load things in the currently selected tab. That's what this use case provides to the feature. So the feature will just call this with whatever you typed. And we need to create instance of this. We already created session use cases over here, so we can just get the load URL use case and pass it to it. Now that's already everything that is needed. There's more stuff we could provide. Just as an example, there's this search use case. If I go to my desktop browser and say hello world, I don't want to load the website hello world, right? I want to perform a search. And so I can provide a search use case to this feature, and then it will see, okay, this is text that is a search and not a URL, so I will invoke this use case or this, and so on. But for now, let's just load URLs. And as before, this only needs to happen if we are actually in the app, looking at the app. Like if I click this link and go to the background quick enough, now there's no need to update the toolbar and listening to changes and so on. Only once I go back to this app, I want the toolbar to get updated. So it needs some lifecycle events. And since this is still a plain activity and not using Android X, we will just call start and stop ourselves. And I think that should be enough. We just throw in this toolbar feature, start and stop it, and it will update once we click links, and it will update or load pages if you type into it. There's only one last thing I want to do. I feel like black is maybe not the best choice, because I wonder if the text is black too. Yeah. So let's pick some grayish, which will work with white and black text, and then we can later figure out what to do. There are a bunch of properties and methods we can call on browser toolbar to make it look differently. Deploy. Okay, that's a very bright gray. So you might have problems seeing the lock icon here, which is currently white. And yeah, I don't want to style it now. I think that is something we can do at a different time. But you see, it's showing the URL. Now I click this button here. We see a loading progress already. The lock icon is showing that we are on an HTTPS site. The URL update, and now I click into it, It is selected, the keyboard comes up, and I go to theverge.com. You see that it did not autocomplete. That's also something we could look into. Should be easy to set up, and I think it crashed. So let's look at the logs. Here's a shell. I still prefer to use pitcat to read the log. Okay, there's a lot of red. Where is the exception? Here we are closer. No, I can't see the actual exception. Let's do this again. Of course it did not crash this time. I guess this is a case of works on my machine. Let's go to Heise, it's a German computer news website. I sometimes, or quite often actually, use this as a test page because it's I've been using this for such a long time. Yeah, but it seems to load quite slowly. This page, unfortunately, better to use with an ad blocker. Something we can do one of the next episodes too. Let's try. Last time we tried the Verge, right? Let's try this again. Awesome, worked. URL is updating. I think that is enough for now. Let's commit this. No, not this folder. This one. Let's quickly look at the diff. So we added a bunch of components. Session component and state component. Those are keeping the state for us. We dropped in the component. We added two features, the session feature and the toolbar feature. We need the engine update the state. Those need to be in sync, and whenever the state changes, we need to update the toolbar. That's what those do. Then in the activity, we created an instance of those two features. We created a store and a session manager. Then we created use cases that those features can invoke if they want to do something. Then we call start and stop at the right time on the features. And we remove the code that initially loaded a page, because now we add sessions to the session managers. Session manager whenever we want more tabs. Then the view, we only dropped in the toolbar. That's all. It is a browser that you can use to browse the web, I guess, at this point already. There are a lot of things missing if you actually use it, like you want to have a full screen mode, you want to download things, I want to long press on a link and open it in a background tab or save this image to disk. There are a lot of things. And a bunch of those things will be provided by those feature components. Let's see. Search is an interesting topic. I guess we could look at next time. Maybe the context menus. If you write other apps that use custom tabs, that's of course a functionality that the browser needs to provide. There's a component that does this for you. The awesome bars may be interesting. Let me quickly show you what an awesome bar actually is. Let's see. Which browser could we use? Hey, Firefox Nightly. If I type into the browser, oh, this emulator is pretty slow right now. Then usually here things appear like this is search suggestions from the search engine that auto-completes or makes suggestions based on what I'm typing. Or I see here this page I visited previously or that's currently open. And this thing we call awesome bar, where all those things appear while you type into the toolbar. So we could throw in this next time. Intents are an interesting topic. Of course, the browser often opens when you click links in other apps. So you need to be able to handle a bunch of intents. Or you want to have your browser provide all the things for progressive web apps. That's a component. Reader view. It's pretty nice if you want to convert the page you're currently looking at into something that you can consume easily on your device. Like remove all the distraction and only see the text, like if you're reading an ebook on your phone. There are a bunch of those. We can throw them in and slowly build up our browser to support all the things we need. And then we maybe throw one out and do something else. Like, give you an example, we now use the, this is the Firefox. Go back to this. We use the default toolbar that the component provides us. We could try implement the interface and build a different toolbar, maybe a super small one, maybe one that shows the URL behind the status bar of the phone. Something really crazy we could try, and as long as we implement those interfaces, the same ones, it will work with exactly same code. We dropped in a browser toolbar here. If I go to the code, you can see it implements a toolbar, which is an interface. So if we implement this interface with something, we can drop it into this XML layout, pass it to the feature here, and it will just work as it works here. So yeah, those are things we could look at. If you have an opinion on what you would like to see, go to this repository. This contains all the code we just talked about, and open an issue or comment on one of those issues here. It will decide what we look at next time. So for now, let's just commit what we just did. And we added a toolbar to the browser. Push. Okay. Here it is. Thank you everyone who watched today. I am going to stream again. I'm not sure, maybe over the weekend, I'm not sure. If you give me a good idea on the GitHub issues, what to do next, then maybe over the weekend. Yeah, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.